Welcome to this short introduction to our toolkit and some of the food production systems which sit within our toolkit. The toolkit is arranged in morphological layers, and I'm going to start with the small scale and move right up to the large scale. Starting with buildings and rooftops. Rooftops of buildings, of course, if they're flat, can be incredibly useful for food production. And there's a number of examples here which I think are really nice examples. The top left is Brooklyn Grange Farm in New York. That's a CSA project which grows fruit and veg for its members and also sells produce at markets. The bottom left picture is of a rooftop forest garden in Reading in the UK, and that is about 20 years old now. It's a space that's used for food production on a very small scale, education and social space, and that was built on a roof that was leaking, and it needed to be repaired due to the leak, and they decided to slightly over-engineer the flat roof to enable it to take a garden and the weight of soil, and it can now it's now established all in 1 foot only depth of soil. So that is remarkable that all of those plants have been established in only a foot of soil, and that is a good precedent for rooftops where they can't take and hold a lot of weight of the soil. The middle bottom picture is from Munich in Germany, and that is an example which is primarily for education. It's a small rooftop, it's got a few sheep, some chickens and some bees on it, and it's used to educate city children around food production in the middle of the city. And the right hand picture is from New York also, and this is the Elizabar case study, where a greenhouse has been built on top of the building, and the building is used for Elizabar's bakery, and he decided to use the excess heat and waste heat from his bakery to heat a greenhouse on the roof. So the heat's recycled and the greenhouse produces year-round salad and fruit, and particularly supporting products for his own bakery. For example, making the jam from fruits from the greenhouse for his donuts. So this is the case study of Elizabar, constructed in 1995 and still going today. He's got a chain of cafes, bakeries and shops across New York, and this is a really good example of a closed loop system using rooftops to not only create food but also to repurpose something that was otherwise a waste product, the heat, and in order to create further supporting products for his business. This is an example rooftop from one of my conceptual designs, which was made for Hong Kong, and these two podium blocks have aquaponic greenhouses on the rooftops, and then also planting of productive trees, so both sketchum pepper trees and hibiscus trees for tea, in conjunction with aquaponic greenhouses, and I've shown here the amount of produce that is produced from those production systems. The other rooftop from this design was a flat roof turned into woodland, so a bit like the Reading example, where could be potentially in only a foot of soil, and it's used to create trees and a woodland for chickens to undergraze. And in this design I've put 72 chickens on the rooftop. They're completely free range, so they can roam about scratching, grazing, eating grubs and plants, and between the 72 chickens they would produce 18,000 eggs in a year. And the last example is a slightly larger rooftop which included both aquaponic greenhouses for fish and vegetable production, but also tree planting and vegetable beds, and the veg beds are quite large, so there's a lot of potential for veg production. And then also I've counted the productive crops from the trees, which consist of almond nuts and the fruit from plum, apricot and cherry. Another rooftop example from London is in Canary Wharf, and this rooftop garden is above Canary Wharf train station, and it's partially enclosed by this geodesic timber dome. And what's so nice about this design is that some of the glass panels in the roof are missing, so that insects and bird life can come in and out freely of the garden for pollination and for pest control. And it's a really nice enclosed system. This garden is not primarily for food production, it's primarily as a social space. There's a couple of cafes and bars within the garden. But I think it gives us an interesting idea for rooftop gardens, which can be enclosed and a really nice space, but also enabling nature to come in and out, and to enable food production. That concludes the taster of the building section of the cards. And now we're going to look at what we can produce on plots of varying sizes. So this is a case study of James West. It's not mine. There's a link at the bottom of where the project can be found. And this is a design of a terraced house in Bolton in Lancashire in the UK. And it's been designed to house as much food production as possible. So it includes some veg beds on the front drive, living wall and internal planting in the front wall of the house, back garden for tree growing, and there's also some pigs in the back garden. And in the basement of the house there is an aquaponic system for fish production. I will say that any system that includes livestock, I would always want it to be the highest possible standards of welfare. I wouldn't want any animal to be squeezed into a space or not have appropriate space for good welfare. And they would need good levels of care, a clean environment and healthy food. But providing those conditions have been met, this potential of this design is really exciting. And so the potential within a house of production of pigs, therefore meat, and fish for fish meat, as well as fruit and veg between the front and the back garden, is really exciting. And I think this design just goes to show the potential of what could be squeezed into one plot on its own, and how if we started to design and think about housing like this, the difference that could make in terms of the production of food. Aquaponics are an interesting system. It's the closed loop cycle of fish in tanks and plants grown within that system, often in a greenhouse or a similar setup. And the water is cycled throughout the system. So the fish poo feeds the plants, it's the plant fertilizer, and it gives the plants the nutrients that they need to grow. And the plant roots filter the water and make it clean, and the water just cycles through those two systems, so through the fish tank and through the plants, through the fish tank, through the plants. And so this symbiotic relationship works really well because the plants get lots and lots of nutrients from the fish poo, which means that they grow faster and they produce more food. And if we decided to create this aquaponic greenhouse in something like a biodome, or a heated greenhouse that was heated year-round here in the UK, then we could be looking at producing some really exciting tropical crops. And I've put some examples here, such as watermelon plantain, bananas, vanilla, etc. So we could really be looking at shifting the amount of produce that's imported into this country. Now let's have a look at streets and the type of food that can be produced in our streets and what kind of food production systems we might include there. Silviculture is the cultivation of trees. So silvi is the tree bit. And this is an example from Todmorden in the UK. And this is fruit trees planted around a car park near a new health centre that was built. And using trees as part of our urban landscape and streetscape is a really great way of greening our streets and creating greener streets, access to nature, aesthetics, but also welcoming biodiversity into our streets. And then we could be looking at what can we produce from these trees. So we could be looking at fruit and nut trees. We'd need to have a system in place for catching fruit or nut, and or for harvesting. There would need to be systems in place, but the potential of fruit and nut production within our streets is huge. And each tree can produce an awful lot of fruit or nut by weight. So most trees, once mature, will produce somewhere between 5 kilograms and 20 kilograms of fruit or nut per tree. So that's an awful amount of food that could be entering into the local food system just from street trees. Raised beds. I really like the picture on the right because it's not about food production, but there's some flowers in there. It's creating a ground cover layer of vegetation underneath the tree canopy. It's protected by those railings from dogs, from people, so it's not walked over. It's a safe haven for insects, spiders, potentially small amphibians, frogs, toads, etc. For small garden birds to go in there and hunt and scratch around and eat some of the insects. So just that small amount of planting is adding so much in terms of biodiversity and landscape. And also it's making these people really happy. So just seeing something like this at the base of a tree can really change an urban landscape. And the next level of that would be for it to be food production. And there's a number of different crops that could be grown in that particular scenario, even though this example is not about food production. But the picture on the left is, and that's another one from Todmorden. And that is a vegetable bed which sits outside the police station on one of the main roads in Todmorden itself. And what's happened in Todmorden as part of the Incredible Edible project is that raised beds like this have been put all around the town, at the train station, at the police station, at the fire station, at the college, to really showcase food production within the public realm and to show people what food growing could look like, what crops are in season, and to inspire people to do more of that at home, at allotments, in schools, etc. And so the impact of really public facing food production is really exciting. I used to live in Todmorden, so I know it very well. I lived there for 5 years. It's an ex-milling town, so it had a massive unemployment and lack of industry. But the idea of Incredible Edible brought about a completely different culture of food growing. They've got growing into all of the schools in the town, both primary and secondary school. They promote local produce as part of the project, which has really created a value for local food. It's meant that some people have started food businesses or food production businesses, creating new products. So there's a lady who takes honey from the bees that are kept in the churchyard to make a honey ice cream and then sells the honey ice cream locally. So it's inspired a whole load of knock-on effects of food businesses and food ideas. And it's really created a food culture in the town itself. So it means that people come and visit. So it's bringing money into the town. People are staying there, so they're paying for accommodation. They're paying to eat out. They're having, breakfast, lunch, dinner somewhere out in the town, cafe, restaurant, hotel, pub, bar. supporting the town and entering money into the local economy. So this idea on its own has brought a lot of economy and economic benefits to the town. And lastly, we're going to look at the green and blue infrastructure. So we're going to look at larger scale food production systems, which could happen as part of green open spaces, as part of parks, waterways, field networks, public open greenways, recreational grounds, etc., to use the space for food production. So the first example is Forest Gardens, and this is a picture of me planting a forest garden with lots of other people back in 2017 in Oxford. It sits within a public park, so it's quite an interesting situation because this is completely open to the public. People walk past, you can see that there's pathways either side. So it was designed to be a food garden which could encourage biodiversity but also encourage people into the space to harvest the food themselves. So it's not a commercial food production system in itself in this situation, but a forest garden itself could be designed for commercial food production. It's just that in this instance it's used on the incredible edible basis of come and help yourself. And this was it a few years later, so you can see everything's grown up really tall. We're now having to do an annual trim of everything to keep it to the right size. So we've got hazelnuts growing in there, we've got fruit trees, we've got nut trees, we've got almond trees, we've got fruit bushes. Every time I go there, I see loads and loads of birds and lots of life happening within the space. And also whenever I garden there, all the people that walk past say, thank you for doing what you're doing, we really appreciate the space. We come and pick berries in the summer. So forest gardens are a low maintenance system. They replicate woodlands and they can be 5 metres squared, they can be 1 hectare, 10 hectares large. So the potential of low maintenance food production systems is really, really strong when you start to think about forest gardens and how that can fit within a local landscape. This is another example from the UK in Manchester. This sits within a public park, and this is a forest garden in a circle but in 4 different sections, and this is maintained by volunteers. The rooftop garden in Reading, which I mentioned earlier, is also a forest garden, so it replicates a woodland, got trees, shrubs, climbers, lower growing plants, all working together, just like the picture on the right, which is Martin Crawford in the UK, UK's leading forest garden expert, within his 30-year-old forest garden. And you can see that there are loads and loads of different plants all interacting together. And the whole idea is that all of these plant layers, A, create more crop production, and B, create low maintenance systems because you're not getting unwanted plants there. You're only getting the plants that you want in that space. Swales are a really important system for rainwater catchment. Also to manage heavy rainfalls, monsoon weather periods. So they're ditches or hollowed out areas of the ground with specific planting, and they are put in places where they can take a big influx of water, absorb it into the ground, the plant roots do their work, the plants build the soil, and the soil can therefore hold more water and absorb more water, and the plant roots help filter that water, filter any oils or pollutants that get washed off a road. And then that water soaks into the ground, and so they typically sit there dry until there's rain, and then they can absorb the water. So the plants there do a really, really special job of both absorbing the water and also cleaning the water, and then they just sit there and grow, and then they wait for the next rainfall. So really important as part of water management in an urban environment because they can cope with large amounts of water at once, making streets safer, and also helping with flood alleviation, but also helping to capture that water. If there isn't a lot of rain, then they can sit there and they can absorb the rainwater, which means that the water table underneath the ground is raised, and that water subsoil gets wetter and wetter year on year. And this is a great example in the USA of the use of swales and public forest garden planting, because all of the sidewalks and pavements are planted up with edible forest gardens, and there is also a network of swales which happen across the community in order to catch runoff from the roads and be absorbed into the landscape. I hope that that is a useful whistle-stop tour of some of the cards in our toolkit, and I hope that that has given you some intrigue and some insight into what urban food production could look like, but also potentially raised some questions about the detail of some of these designs, and also how you might like to install some of these systems and what other systems might be available. So in our toolkit, we've got 34 different food production systems, all at different scales like the ones that I've talked about, and they all offer something different to the potential of urban food production, and that is one of the areas in which we really specialise. We offer consultancy and training and CPD in all aspects of urban food production, as well as planting plans and designs and planting suggestions for your own specific site. So if we can help, all of our socials are on this page, and we would love to hear from you with any questions that you might have.